A Conversation with John Conenna is sponsored in part by the original Nautili and Son, serving the Chicagoland area since 1947. The family that has taken pride in offering Italian sausages to many of their loyal customers over the years, and which have expanded a product line to their top-rated submarine sandwiches, hot foods, sauces, pastas, and a full catering menu. The store has passed on from grandfather to father to son, but has kept with the traditions of offering excellent quality at a great value using the finest ingredients and excellent service. Discover the difference at the original Nautili and Son, 7652 West Belmont Avenue. And don't forget, it's their only location. And now, on to our episode. Good evening and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with John Conenna. Tonight, we are thrilled to have on, basically for a third time, with my guest tonight, David Dupuis.
Hi, John.
How are you, David? Thank you
I'm awesome
for coming on. And he's an award-winning author who has written 3 beautiful hockey books that I know of, and I'm going to hold them up here tonight because I got 2 out of those 3. And of course, like I said, an award-winning author and the also acclaimed for the 7 Keys of Hildegard. Just a fantastic thing. Of the papal thing, and we'll get into a little bit maybe of that at the end. But
sure, yeah.
Tonight we are going to talk about a book that has been close to my heart since 1998, the first one, which I'm going to hold up. This was the original, everyone.
It was.
This was the original, which is still in mint condition. I always, try to. Somebody will ask me, "Can I borrow it?" I says, "No." And this is the back of the book, just in great shape. This book by David came out in 1998. But tonight, we talk about the 25th anniversary updated edition, Sawchuk, The Troubles and Triumphs of the World's Greatest Goalie. It's the background that you see behind David right now, but this is the actual book.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the front and the back where it shows that picture, David, really shows in that picture the career of Terry Sawchuk, from that mask and to that impression that is on his face. What is going on with you, young man? And it's great to see you again.
Yes, great to see you, John. Always great to talk with you. Well, obviously, the book coming out is a big thing. I mean, it's hard to believe it's been 25 years.
Wow.
Hard to believe.
From that original one. Incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I have to ask you the first question tonight because I had seen that you had told us in one of the last interviews almost about a year and a half ago that this was going to happen. Is it something for an author like yourself, who's, like I said, an award-winning, acclaimed author like yourself? Is it something that you wanted to do, or is it something that has to be done?
It crept up, and the original book is no longer in print. The original publisher went bankrupt approximately 6 years after Sawchuk came out originally. So there were no books out there, and I thought, okay, well, I could bring one out. Actually, it's funny. I approached a few publishers about bringing it out 25th anniversary, and I couldn't get any bites. So I decided, well, you know what? I'm going to do this myself. But I waited. I waited for the special October of 2023 would be the 25th anniversary. Keep it nice and neat and special. And so it was funny. You talk about. I love the cover. I am so excited about the cover.
The cover is fantastic. I know we were seeing it behind you, but I just want to show you it's still just fantastic. Matter of fact, correct me if I'm wrong, David. This picture of Mr. Sawchuk, of Terry, I have a photo that I bought from a collection called Harold Barkley.
Harold Barkley took that photo. Yes.
Yes, and I have it pristine somewhere in a collection. So was it from, I was wondering, that was another thing I wanted to ask you was, did you look at like a variety of things, or because basically on the book, on the 1998 book, it's not as clear in the
No,
sense of, yeah.
yeah, no, it's about the cover. I had played with that photo, and I had played with my own cover on this Terry Sawchuk fans Facebook page, and my covers were okay. I'm not really a graphic artist, and there's a fellow from New York City named Dennis Simon reached out to me,
Okay.
and he said, David, I am a big Sawchuk fan. I'm a graphic artist. I've done NHL masks. I've done some football masks. I do a lot of hockey masks, semi-pro, that kind of thing, the lower leagues. But he says, I would be thrilled if you would let me design your 25th anniversary
Wow.
cover. He says, you did okay with your photos, with your covers, but 25th anniversary, he said, it needs to be over the top. And I said, I don't know if I could afford you. He says, you could certainly afford me.
No,
So
wow, there was,
yeah,
and again, just to go over, what is the gentleman's name, just so we,
Dennis Simon.
oh wow.
Dennis Simon from New York. Yes,
So
he
you
was.
had to be you had to be thrilled that about this situation, especially
Oh
now
yeah,
with the book, right?
absolutely. And we threw some designs around, but finally came up with that final one that when he showed me what he was thinking for the back cover. Wow,
Wow.
and he photographed his own mask. He has a replica Sawchuk mask. He's a big Sawchuk fan, loved the original book. So we were a really good fit, went back and forth so often, but came up with a product that we're both really proud of,
Oh wow. And not to elaborate on what you just said, but really the back of
yeah,
this book, the back
yeah,
of it, and you look at that, of course, that picture that is very famous of him with the stitching and all the what he took as a goaltender, and that mask, which that's why you're this award-winning author, that you put this into this sense. I had done a little promo, and I maybe I should have gotten your approval on it.
oh,
I
that's
did a
okay.
little promo on Facebook, and it was the old Rod Serling song from the Twilight Zone.
Apropos.
And but again, to give, like you did with the book front and back, to give that reader who watched that era of Mr. Sawchuk, wow, I remember this goaltender and what he went through, and both pictures, just you did a fantastic job. And we're just on the cover of the book here, at the back of the book, but wow, I got goosebumps when you sent me the first picture.
Awesome, good, because you deserve to have a good copy, and I'm really proud of it. It's something to bring out a 25th anniversary book, but if you can bring it out nicer than the first cover, then you're onto something.
Well, I have to tell you, well, let's go back in time again with Terry a little bit here, because I mean, I know our audience, for the people that are into Mr. Sawchuk, because this is going to go out again to a lot of sites. And as we have known each other, I think now for 2.5, 3 years,
Yeah,
the sites have grown. This gentleman, Mr. Sawchuk, has not been forgotten. He
no,
comes up, I think, once a week on a broadcast somewhere about his records and everything else. Again, you go back to when you started this.
oh yeah.
How do you feel after, let's say, before it came out in 98, what was the process of writing
Oh,
about this book? How many years before did you start to think about Terry Sawchuk?
I started thinking about doing I mean, I'm a little small town boy from Ontario, and to think he was my hero. I was 9 years old when the Leafs won the cup, and he stood on his head. And
Uh,
to think that, so I had written a few little history books, but there was nothing major. And then a friend of mine by the name of Paul Henry was a scout with the Florida Panthers at the time, and we met at a wedding at the bar at midnight. We're both at the bar at the same time. And he says, "Are you writing any more history books?" I went, "Well, yeah." But I said, Paul, and he was obviously a scout, knew his hockey, knew hockey. And I said, my dream was always to write a book about Terry Sawchuk. Well, there were people at this wedding I didn't know. There were there were pro players and semi-pro players. He was dragging them over to my table and said, "Ask David anything about Terry Sawchuk. He can answer it." And so at the end of the night, he said, "If you want to do this book, I'll help you any way I can." Right. So I wrote the family. Got nowhere. Got no nothing. 100 writers had tried to approach the family over the years, and they weren't touching anything. And so I went back to see my friend Paul. I said, "I've written to the family. I haven't heard anything." He says, "Oh yeah." He picked up the phone. He calls Marcel Pronovo, was Terry
Oh yeah,
Sawchuk's bus. They scouted together. Marcel for New Jersey. They always crossed paths.
and probably Terry's best friend during all those years.
Best friend. And so he called Marcel right in front of me, and he said, "Send me Mr. Dupuis' letter." So it was faxed back then. And I didn't even type. I didn't have a computer. Anyway, I faxed him the letter. Within 10 minutes, Marcel calls me. He says, "You're the fella we've been waiting for. And I will talk to the family, and I'll pick my time, and stay tuned." And within a week, he had talked to Jerry. And I remember being at work. I don't know how they got my work number, but I remember Jerry calling me at work and said, "Let's do this book. If Marcel trusts you, the Sawchuk family trusts you." And we were off to the races. Still, we had a few hurdles. I was working on the book. I had a publisher, some pretty interested. The publisher who eventually did publish the book started publishing. But I remember I was in Windsor interviewing Marcel. I'd been over to Detroit and talking to Del Vecchio and some of the guys over there. And the book by Brian Kendall came out called Shutout. And
Oh yes.
I remember reading the book in my hotel room. I thought, I'm done. You know, I'm not gonna, it's not gonna work out. I remember calling Marcel, and Marcel said, "Don't worry, you got the real story. This guy's just written a fluff book off the shelf with files from the Hockey Hall of Fame. You've spoken to everybody. You've met with Pat. I mean, come on." Anyway, true enough though, the publisher did say, "Oh, you know what? We're not interested anymore. There's already been a book out, so the market has been scooped." All right. So my friend Paul Henry to the rescue again. There's a fellow by the name of Roy McGregor. He's quite a hockey author. Did a book with Ken Dryden. He's, I think, major editor with one of the major Toronto papers here now.
Okay.
And he's written many hockey books. And so Paul called him and texted him what I had written. And Roy faxed me back to say, "Your writing is good. Don't worry about it. I hear the first book is bombing. And 1 year in publishing is like forever. So finish your book and then submit it with just a letter, just to say, I have finished. I have the inside story. Are you interested?" Well, I wrote them a letter on Monday, and Wednesday, the big editor was calling me and said, "We'd like to see what you have." And then, so I remember mailing it down, had to mail it back then, couldn't email, nothing like that. And by Friday, we had a deal. They were all over it. They wanted it, and the rest was history.
David, I have to ask you. So, okay, I know the book comes out in '98, but how long ago before this, when this all was going on, the posturing, was it 2 years before?
2 years, like I started in 96,
Okay.
maybe the end of 95. And then it was 2 years to do the interviewing, the traveling, the writing. And in a sense, it was, I'm a firm believer in fate. And for me to get to write Terry's story, where I'm just a small town boy from Canada, who am I? I'd never written anything major, and I'm sure the Sawchuk family had many major writers approach them,
Oh, sure.
and none of them got anywhere. So I really presume it was fate, And then, as you see in the book, I put Mrs. Sawchuk's letter to me at the very beginning.
Yes, from Pat, right? From Pat.
Yes,
Yes.
Pat, we really hit it off, and she wrote me that beautiful short letter. I had to include it in the book. I mean, it says everything about our relationship. We got along really well. She trusted me. The interview for over 3 days was tough. I mean, Terry put her through hell. And so I'm a psychiatric nurse by trade. I
Yes,
was up
that was
to that
yes. I see that in the beginning.
so
That was your profession for 35 years.
yes, yes. So that came in handy with Mrs. Sawchuk because we had to stop often, give her Kleenex, let her compose herself,
Sure.
and she got back on her horse and she kept going. And amazingly, at the end of the interview, I said, okay, Pat, is there anything off the record? And she said, no, David, you give her warts and all. It is what it is. And so that was, and they trusted me to write it the right way and not. I could have been a terrible writer and really smeared this whole character. And I
Exactly.
wanted to handle him with grace, even though he put their family through hell.
Yes.
Wanted to handle it just the right way.
But see, and of course, this is an advantage for me to talk to because in the 3 years that I've known you through 3 interviews, again, this is like a 25th anniversary for you, meaning this. We did not break this down in the first 2 interviews. There's a compassion about you. You first of all, he's your idol. Like Tony Esposito is mine. You knew everything about him. And now that trust. I have to say something, and I will send this to you. I just interviewed a gentleman who interviewed a legendary catcher here in Chicago, Randy Huntley.
Okay.
And his name is John St. Augustine, and he said it exactly like you. He went up to Huntley, who's still alive, and he says, Randy, why me? When there's so many great authors here in Chicago. And Randy, I'm telling you, David, you gave me goosebumps. Randy turned to him and says, John St. Augustine, I trust you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that Sawchuk family, Pronovo, of course, Marcel, who played with him in Detroit and in Toronto, just fantastic.
Yeah.
I have to tell you,
I got to be very close.
David, just hearing this tonight, and if anybody again could get their hands on the 98 book or even just now this book, they're similar, but the thing is this: you brought Sawchuk like you were interviewing Sawchuk. Am I correct in saying that?
I think I got to know him. Marcel would say, you got to know him better than I did because you got to see all the sides of him. I saw one side. Terry compartmentalized his life. He had his drinking buddies. He had his hockey buddies. He had his family. I was the first to see them all and to experience Terry as he was as a whole person. And so that was, it was special and it was scary. And, it's hard to experience the bad stuff about your idol. I mean, I knew some of the stuff, but to hear it from Pat and the kids and Marcel, there's a few stories that didn't make the book because we just couldn't put it in. But it was really interesting that when I was with Marcel the very first time, he looked at me and he said, "I know you're going to do us very, very proud. I know Terry, if he were here, he would trust you." And then again, he says, you might not ever get the big book written if Terry were here, but I have full faith in you that you're going to do it right. And that meant a lot. I mean, I still get goosebumps sometimes when I think about it.
Oh God, I do too. Just thinking, and I'm the outsider looking in. I'll never forget. I was walking through a Barnes and Nobles in 1998 when I saw it.
Yeah.
Wow, this book is thick. This original book was thick. I says, there's a lot of info in here. And I never bothered to buy the book Shutout because I always leaf through things when I'm in a library.
Oh, yeah.
And you really depicted it. He comes up in 1949. I think thank you for games with Detroit. And of course goes to 1969 and ends up with the New York Rangers in the last games.
Yeah.
But those early years with him, I mean, how you depict him when Pronovo, the family, Pat, everybody, they really broke down this athlete to you of a guy that was just he was spot on in the early 50s. I mean,
Oh,
you
oh
couldn't
yeah.
put a piece of corn past him.
No, he was his first 5 years in the league. I don't think any goalie will ever touch his goals against average was under 2 in every year. That's where he got a lot of his shutouts. Got a big head start on that 100 in the first 5 years. But
Really?
the amazing thing about Terry was there's such a transformation. His early years, he was roly poly. He was kind of big. He was carefree. He was still snarly, but he was carefree. Reporters could approach him a bit. And then there was one year he came into camp really fat. He really liked milkshakes,
Oh
and
wow.
he played ball in the summer back in Winnipeg. And then one year he came back to camp really heavy, and Adams went berserk on him and made him lose weight. And he lost the weight, but he also lost some of his personality, some of his joy a little bit, and he became more snarly and more detached. And when Pat met him in 53, 54, he was a snarly, kind of an angry man. And you know, knowing his injuries, I don't know if you caught the end of the book where I put some new quotes in, and
Yeah, there were some new quotes.
Yeah, Marcel Porneville says, you're talking about considered who is the greatest of all time. Marcel said, Terry never played one game healthy, not one, not in his 20 years. A permanently broken elbow. You think about that. Permanently broken elbow. That alone would would end a career.
Sure.
You keep everything else on top of that. He said, I can understand why he was so grumpy. Of course, I'd have been grumpy with a broken elbow too my whole life. You
Right.
know, and the injuries just accumulated and accumulated, and the poor guy was in hospital in the early years every summer having a elbow operation, and you know, but then the big turn was when after his fifth year they trade him to Boston, and it broke his heart. It really broke his heart. Detroit was his home. I think he had a Red Wing on his butt tattooed. I mean, he was
Sure.
true and blue Detroit, and or red, I should say. And when they traded him to Boston, and then he got mononucleosis, and he ended up retiring in his second year because the mono was so bad. They didn't give him a break, and they were doing good. And Boston had been the bottom of the league, and with
Sure.
Terry, they were doing pretty good.
Pretty good. Sure.
And
David, did he have a nervous breakdown in Boston?
no, I see that all the time,
Yes. Yeah.
and it was mononucleosis. I mean,
Okay.
mononucleosis does affect you mentally, you
Sure.
know, because you're weak, you're tired, you have no strength. Pat talked about one time where he was walking from the car to the house and he collapsed because he just didn't have the strength. Mononucleosis, you're supposed to rest between 2 and 4 months.
Right.
Well, within 2 weeks, they had him back in net. They were starting to lose.
Sure.
Boston, well, they were going for first place. Well, the pressure was on for him, and he was competitive. Oh, I'll get back in there, and he should have never. He should
Right.
have been arrested for 6 months. So that really was a turning point in his life. I don't think he ever trusted management. That trade of Jack Adams ever again. It
Sure.
made a snarly man even snarlier.
Gnarlier, right? And I got to tell you, and I know we touched on this, but just for our audience, we touched on this with you and Jerry at that time, and Mark at that time when we did the last interview. The movie that was depicted about him, of course, is just kind of a raunchy thing, but some things came out of it. Like you
Yes.
said, you did see the depression. Oh my God! Somebody, I think in his family or somebody tells him, "Hey, I just heard on the radio you got traded to Boston." He was
Yeah.
shocked,
Yeah.
and then of
Yeah.
course goes to Boston, retires, comes out of
Yeah.
retire. Do you know how he came out of retirement to go back to Detroit?
Well, he was hanging around Detroit, and they had grown quite down on Glenn Hall. Glenn Hall
Yes.
had a great 2 years, but he had, they didn't win a cup. And the second year they got put out in the playoffs. So Jack and Glenn Hall was not one to take any guff from Jack Adams.
Right.
And so when Jack would say something, Glenn Hall would tell him where to go. Well, you
Yeah.
didn't do that with Jack Adams. So
Right.
he found himself quickly on his way to Chicago. And Terry was the natural replacement. And, he had so many contacts, hung around with the Red Wings still in the off summer.
Sure.
So
Sure.
it was pretty easy for him to get back with Detroit. And I'm sure he let it be known that, hey, I'd come back.
And again, going back to this Glenn Hall thing, I know that Glenn Hall and Ted Lindsay were starting that player representative thing.
Yes.
And that started some trouble, of course, with Adams.
Yes.
And of course, with payroll and everything. And the rumors that, Gordie Howe was only making a certain amount of money. But I know that Adams did not want to live the rest of the 60s with Hank Basin. There's no way.
No. But he was the one who brought him up, because Terry was Hank Basin would never have showed up on the spot if Terry had taken care of himself. He was back to drinking, and he got viral neuritis, and neuritis affects your lower legs, and if you drink too much, so he went to the hospital twice by ambulance. And that's when next thing you know, they're at a team meeting, and who walks in? Hank Basin. And Terry took one look at him and said to, I think it was Lefty Wilson, he says, who the heck is that? What is he doing here? Well, he knew who he was, but what is he doing here? And so he started to play some games, and Terry was finally exposed to the fact that you can be replaced. And he pulled up his socks, and he became the Terry, not quite of old, but they didn't have the same team anymore either,
Right.
They made it to some finals and stuff in those last Red Wing years, but just couldn't quite get the job done.
That's a great question. I always wanted to ask you this question. You, of course, knowing him, and of course, writing this great book about him. Do you think that second time around with Detroit after the Boston, the skills started to erode just from him not playing?
I think it was a double-edged sword for sure, that, he liked to play every night. But also I think it did him good to rest occasionally. He was getting older, and what really saved his career was when he put that mask on, and he got renewed confidence, and he was fearless again. He had talked to the team doctor the year before he put it on, telling Dr. Wapatano, he says, I'm getting a little scared of some of the guys were starting to really boom the puck now.
Yeah.
In the early 50s, they only had one or two guys who could really shoot a puck on a team, but with improved sticks and improved conditioning a bit and better equipment, better training a little bit, there were, 6 or 7 guys who could really whip the puck. And of course, when Boom Boom and Bobby Hall come along, so when he donned the mask in '62, I think it gave him a renewed confidence. And it's funny, everybody talks about Jacques Plante. He invented the mask, which he did.
Yes.
And he was the first to wear it, but the Canadians still gave him a hard time about it.
Yes.
It wasn't until Sawchuk put it on, and Jacques Plante confessed kind of grudgingly, said, it wasn't until Sawchuk put the mask on that the Canadians stopped bugging me about it.
Right.
Because if he was wearing it, he was one of the superstars. It had to be okay. And Terry doesn't get that credit. He was the one who made it okay.
And that's a great point, Babir, because you could say, here's this snarly guy, and he's wearing a mask. And I remember reading stuff about Plante where Toll Blake would say, "You're not wearing that mask.
Yeah.
You're not wearing that mask." But Plante
gave him a hard time,
because Andy Bathgate had hit Plante in a game, and you still see the pictures of Plante with blood gushing out.
Absolutely.
Detroit leaves them unprotected, of course, in the 64 draft, which was kind of putting all their money into an upstart goalie who was a great goaltender at that
Oh
time,
yeah,
Roger Crozier.
yes. With and Roger Crozier had no issues. Little would they know that he had nerves, he had nerve issues, and
Yes.
that would haunt him. He had ulcers, and but boy, what a great goalie he was. But when the Red Wings leave him unprotected, I mean, punch Imlach, punch. But those were the two goals. He had already had Johnny Bauer,
Right.
and in the final before Detroit against Toronto, it was Sawchuk in one net, Bauer in the other.
The other.
And all of a sudden, Punch Imlach realizes I can have both these guys, and they were getting older. I mean, he grabbed Sawchuk faster than he could say his name. He was couldn't believe that he got so lucky to have that. And I mean, the next year, the very first year, they win the Vezina Trophy.
Right.
Bauer and Sawchuk. I mean, uh, and they both didn't mind sharing. I mean, they're both competitive,
Sure.
but I think it elongated both of their careers, the two goalie system, no doubt about it.
Like you said, yeah, instead of playing the 69, 70 games, now you're playing maybe 32, 35 games. And it definitely
Rest the old body. Get the rest of the old body, man.
right. You have to at that age. But what, like you're saying, David, I mean, again, breaking this down and everything, what a luxury Imlach had by going with, and of course, and Toronto is the heartbeat of the 60s in hockey. I mean,
Yeah.
Toronto in those early 60s to 67 is far more remembered than Montreal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, they talk about the Canadians' big monopoly on Stanley Cups in the late 50s, which they did win. But people forget that when the Union came up in the late 50s, not to digress, but a lot of the teams were weakened because of the Union. They wanted to break the Union. So they traded and sent to the minors many good players.
Yes.
But Montreal refused to. Montreal didn't do that. So Montreal stayed strong the rest of the league. So to me, that contributed a bit to the Canadians' 5 Stanley Cups in a row, and they're talked about how great they are, which they were, not taking anything away.
Yeah.
But to the Maple Leafs of the 60s, I mean, and then of course they get my other favorite player, Red Kelly,
Oh, yes.
and
You wrote a great book about that I want to bring up to the audience.
which won the book award in Ontario.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes.
But they had the Over the Hill gang, but the Over the Hill gang knew that they could still get it done. And the thing about Terry is, in his later years, he was always put down and underrated. They thought he was washed up, and you don't laugh at a Terry Sawchuk. Canadians, when they faced the Leafs in '67 Stanley Cup, Chicago laughed at him,
I know.
and they paid the price.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
and then the Canadians, when they went, Terry had a bad game. First off, right off the bat, terrible game. Montreal thought, we got him. Well, you don't laugh at Terry. And then he had another bad game, and they laughed again. Well, that was it. Then he stood on his head, and it was game over, Montreal.
Game over was correct, right? I want to just do a little pause on this and tell our audience what we're doing here tonight. We are visiting with David Dupuis, award-winning author, about his great 25th anniversary updated edition book of Sawchuk, The Troubles and Triumphs of the World's Greatest Goalie. This is the book that just came out in October, just October. This is the front cover of this great book. And David is, of course, that beautiful last name, first and last name, and the back, which you see behind David himself. David, of course, has written the book about Red Kelly. And of course, another book that I have.
A Blackhawk.
The Heart of the Blackhawks, about one of the greatest defensemen ever to put on the Indian head sweater. And it's the legendary Pierre Pilote. And of course, his series on the genre of the 7 Keys of Hildegard. Fantastic. I have not dug into that one yet, but this is who we are visiting with tonight. And I wanted to kind of do a midway point here.
That's okay. Good. You're a good man.
Oh, this is fantastic. Dave, I got to ask you, and I didn't ask you in previous interviews, when he was left unprotected, I know we kind of jumped ahead already to 67, but when he was left unprotected in that 64. Was he shocked or was he happy to go to Toronto? Does anybody know that answer?
I
From
think it
the
was
family?
both. I remember when the reporter called him, he was fixing a fence in the backyard.
Oh,
And the
wow.
reporter called him and said, you're going to Toronto. He says, oh, um, well, I guess okay. He says, I know Johnny and I aren't probably good for 70 games, so you know, yeah, he accepted it pretty quick. Um, Johnny, remember Johnny telling me, he says Terry was always hard to get to know. He
Sure.
always kept you back, and
We're
I think
talking about Johnny Bauer, right, David?
yes, Johnny Bauer,
Yes.
and he said, he was hard to know. He was aloof, and but there's always a competitiveness to every goalie in the '60s, and I'm sure it was hard for the both of them to share a net.
Okay.
Both of them, they both didn't want to give up the net. And Pat always talked about Terry worrying about having to give up the net, having to lose his spot. She said that probably amounted to half his drinking because he worried so much about not playing up to par and losing his spot, which not only the goalies in the original six, but all the players, they always had that hanging over their head. You know,
Right.
it
Right.
was terrible in a way. Excuse me, but no, he accepted it. He was okay.
Yeah, I got to
Yeah,
tell you, David, another great point by you. My son, who now is 37 years old, I always used to tell him when he was younger, this was six teams. And this was the cream of the crop if you were a forward, a defenseman, and of course a goaltender. This
yeah,
was the cream of the crop players. Now you got 35 teams. I feel that hockey is so watered down in comparison to the era that me and you grew up in. So I used to tell my son, this was the cream of the crop. And as a goaltender, you knew if that red light was going on or
yeah,
you had a bad game in some other aspect of the game, you did not want to lose your job. Just a great point by you.
yeah,
I
yeah.
have to tell you, we'll jump to 67 again. You have that great chapter in the book, A Saturday Afternoon in Chicago.
Chicago, yes, yeah,
Goosebumps. You talk about goosebumps because the Blackhawks took a 2-1 lead at the end of one on Bauer. And Bauer, something happened to him. He got hurt. And I guess Emlock looked at Terry with the towel around his neck and says, "You're going in." He goes, "You got to be kidding me. I'm going in." He didn't want to go in. He was sleeping.
no, he was hurt. He was
Yeah.
banged and bruised. Marcel said the left side of his shoulder, which was hurt in practice, was black and blue, tender. He could hardly move,
Right.
hardly dress, and so the story is Imlach went down to the bottom of the back of the end of the bench in the Terry. He called Bauer over and he said, "You're looking a little shook up." And Bauer says, "Yeah, I'm a little shook, I guess." And so Imlach turned to Sawchuk and, what do you think? Well, if I have to go in, I'll start the second. So Bauer looked at Terry and said, "Sorry." uh, you know, and went
And
back.
I did not know, David. I did not know that he should. Then, of course, 2 minutes into that period, the Blackhawks go on a power play, and Robert Marvin, Bobby Hull, let's
Leveled him.
go. Let's go of a cannon that's over Iraq right now,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
hits him in that shoulder, and he was down like a dead deer. And it goes back to what you said about your friend here that you wrote the book about, Pierre Palat, skates around Terry and says, "Terry, don't get up. It's only
yeah,
going to get worse." Well, guess
yeah,
who it got worse
yeah.
for? The India head guys, because they never scored on him after
No,
37 shots over 2 periods.
yeah, no. He gave Pierre a look, and it's funny because Pierre said, "I don't remember saying that," but well, you did. It's all well documented.
Well
And
documented.
he said, "If I would have known, I would have shut up." But it got his blood boiling, and after a few minutes, he asked the trainer, "Help me up, and I'm going to stone those SOBs." And he did.
And he
Uh,
did. It's a great chapter and how you predicted that too, a Saturday afternoon in Chicago.
yeah,
You know, I know after that 67 year, they had to leave, of course, expansion comes in. They had to
yeah,
leave somebody unprotected. He was one of them.
yeah,
And of course, now it's off to Los Angeles where things basically didn't work out there.
No, he should have retired after Toronto. That would have been, when he played that game in Chicago against Bobby Hull and stood on his head, and that led to the elimination of the Hawks. At the end of the chapter, he says, "Oh, I'd like to leave hockey like that in good style." Well, after the '67 Cup win, he really probably should have retired. He would have been
Right.
leaving in good style, but expansion called, and I remember talking to Johnny Wilson, who sat in with Jerry Regan for the LA Kings when they offered him a contract, and they offered him $30,000. Well, he cried. He had never. I think he was getting 14 or 15 with the Leafs, so he had never seen money like that. And I remember Johnny saying, I was standing there and Larry was sitting there, and Terry starts crying. He says, "We all start crying." you know, because Terry was so touched about the money, uh, and then he signed, and he showed flashes of his greatness, but more or less, he didn't have it anymore, and they end up in the playoffs and a deciding seventh game against Minnesota, and Rutledge was the other goalie, Wayne
Right.
Rutledge,
Wayne
and
Rutledge.
he had played well, and Terry had played so. They were surprised. But Red Kelly said, seventh deciding game and all, I gotta go with Yuki. I gotta go with Terry Sawchuk.
Sure.
He's gonna carry the milk. I mean, and he didn't. He had a terrible game. He
Yeah.
was booed mercilessly, and it's just another chapter in the Terry Sawchuk story.
Right.
The next year at camp, he's traded back to Detroit. By
Right.
this time, they've got Roy Edwards and Crozier. There's really no room for him.
Yeah, he
Plays
plays
a
in
few
minimal
games.
games in that
Yeah,
68, 69
yeah,
season. Yeah.
yeah. And then traded to New York the following year, and played a few games for Jackman, in place of Jackman. And Emil Francis had told me, "Oh, I want him to come in and be a stabilizer and give Eddie a bit of a rest." And matter of fact, he even started a playoff game against
Yes.
Boston because he had filled in. He played the rest of the game in that series, and he didn't play bad for the final
No.
15 minutes or so. And Emil thought, I'll throw Terry, and it'll shake up the team and give Jackman something to think about.
Sure.
But it was inevitable that Boston put them out. They had a powerhouse.
Oh, yeah, they were a dominant. That 1969-70 Boston Bruins team was
Yeah.
dominant because
Yeah.
after that series, they came to Chicago and swept to my idol, Tony Esposito, Makita, and Bobby Hull. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know we're coming a little bit close to the end of this, but I have to tell you, do you think he plays after New York? Let's say this thing does not happen.
Right.
The altercation with Stewart, and the way he, of course, his passing in, I think it was in April or May of 1970, when he passed away.
Yeah.
During an
1970.
altercation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, because you're the gentleman that wrote this book, and the job you did here is fantastic, and I'm glad we gave the audience here tonight again a little bit of the depictions of what they're going to look forward to in this book. But David, I got to ask you, do you think Terry Sawchuk still would have played, and how do you think he would have been in retirement?
I think he would have been a grumpy retirement.
Uh-huh.
I don't think he was meant to play hockey, but I think he would have tried to play another season or back up another season. The money was not bad, and he always liked his money. And I think if there would have been a team who wanted him on their bench, he would have, and I think he could have been instrumental in teaching goalies. He had an influence. Phil Muir in the book, at the end of the book, Phil Muir's playing his first game with Montreal, and he skates on the ice, and he sees Terry Sawchuk, and he's practically beside himself because my idol, I can't believe I'm on the same ice
with him
as Terry Sawchuk. And at the end of the game, the Muir's going off the ice at that time. The two teams of the Rangers, I think at Madison Square, they went off the same end.
Yes, they would go on that once. Yes.
Yeah, and he was waiting for Muir, and he patted him on the butt with his stick and said, "Good game, kid. You keep playing like that, you're going to be a hell of a goaltender." Now, it's funny because I flipped back to my friend Paul Henry, who ran into Phil Muir who read the book.
Oh, wow.
And when Mir got to that spot, he told Paul Henry, he says, I cried. I cried when I got to that spot. It really touched me, and I remembered it like, yesterday. So it was a great book. I think it touched a lot of people. I think
Oh,
I'm very proud of it. I think it was one of the, I don't know, I don't want to be self-boasting, but I think I did a pretty good job on it.
you did a phenomenal job. That's a big word for me to say. Being an Italian guy that doesn't pronounce his PHs too well, it's phenomenal. I have to ask you. Of course, we brought up you wrote the book about Red Kelly, and I want to tell the audience that book won the 2016 Ontario Speakers Book Award, the Red Kelly book. The book on Palat is fantastic. I read that book too. That brought me to tears because he truly was the heart of the Blackhawks. That number 3,
underrated, under-recognized.
And then, of course, the series, the genre of the 7 Keys of Hildegard. Can I ask you before I let you go, where does this book and, of course, the original lay? What is
it's ultimately special? Number one, I mean, it was my at that time, it was my dream come true to write a book about Terry, and we called it the world's greatest goaltender. Well, in 2018, the Hockey News still recognized him as the greatest still of all time. And Ottawa and Brodeur are very, very close second, but the Hockey News still pegged him as number 1. And like I wanted that quote from Marcel at the end of the book that says, you can't just look at stats, you have to look at heart. And those of us who judged the goalies at that time, he was part of the esteemed panel, and he says, we knew Terry, we knew what he'd gone through, and for him to have done what he did with everything he had against him, and like I said, never playing a single healthy game in his whole life,
right?
You've got to take that into consideration, and that's why he's still considered number 1. I see lists of goalies these days, and people rate the best goalies of all time. I've even seen lists where Terry's not even included.
Yes,
and I go, well, they just don't know.
They don't know.
Anybody
that I talk to, let's say that was born in 1940, 41, 42, that was basically still friends with my father. And they said to me, boy, you should have saw Sawchuk in the old stadium, and I'm like, and I don't know, I can only compare him to one other athlete. I think that, I don't know if you were into boxing at all. There was a boxer named Sugar Ray Robinson.
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of video is lost of Robinson because when he fought guys like Jake LaMotta and things like that, a lot of those videos are lost. And they says, if you only could have saw the early Sugar Ray Robinson, like Terry Sawchuk. David,
no, I want to add, the book is available on Amazon.com.ca. It's not in a bookstore. It's only on Amazon.
Well, I tell you, I have a great copy here. I have the best copy ever. It's because it's signed by you.
You.
Right there. And I will treasure this forever, just like my original that I will not, no one ever touched. David, I want to thank you. And again, I know I'm going to call you for another interview, but tonight,
absolutely,
I learned more tonight than I did in the first 2 interviews, and don't know how to thank you. And now I know again why you are that award-winning author. Your work is fantastic, and continued success. And we'll promote this like crazy in the coming.
Absolutely.
And this will be coming out in a couple days. So
awesome. Thank you. You're a great interviewer. I love being on your show, and I got a feeling Hildegard will haul me back for a 4th or a 5th time.
David, fantastic work. I mean, you really touched this Chicago guy from the first time I met you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone, and take care.
Thank you.